So today we're going to talk about world building. So I'm currently reading this really interesting book, Sub Creating Arda. So essentially, it's an anthology, a collection of critical essays written by some serious scholars on world building ideas. One of these ideas that I just came across is this idea of like, can stories be too over produced? Can there be too much detail? So Tolkien was, he was a master storyteller, and he added detail at every single layer. When he created a city or a town, it has an entire backstory. So in order to compare what we're trying to explain here is, so you have a story like The Lord of the Rings in one hand, right? Very detailed. There's an entire encyclopedia of what Tolkien meant when he wanted to write the stories and the characters, right? Which is called The History of Middle-earth, which is essentially is like an encyclopedia of, of the story, right? So more detail than you can ever, get your hands on, right? Written by the author himself, right? The authority of that story, right? Now, on the other hand, we have a story that has very little detail, and here we have the stories of the Gospels, right? The stories of Jesus. We have very little. Very little is known. So, the stories of Jesus and the Gospels, Christians are working with very little, right? So compared that to the Lord of the Rings, where Lord of the Rings you have, the 1,000-page Lord of the Rings story, and then if you really wanted to know what Tolkien meant by all the details, there's the History of Middle Earth, and then there's so much detail into it. On the other hand, you have the stories of Jesus and the Gospels, in which we are given very little to work with. Very little, right? Fragments, right? But one of the things that we as human beings love doing is we love filling in the blanks. We love being a part of the story. And these stories of the Gospels have captivated people for thousands of years, right? And it will continue to captivate the minds and imaginations and the hearts of many generations to come, right? With very little detail. So pastors or students or scholars of these biblical stories, they learn these stories, but then they learn how to adapt it and bring it into the time and the place that they're being presented in. And this is what pastors do, every Sunday when they give their sermons, right? They depending on the season. So if it's the holiday season, then they will pick the holiday themes, which are often joy, hope, being patient, and of course love, right? And picking those stories that are appropriate for that time, and then constructing a narrative that is relevant to the congregation in that region, right, in that city. And the framework in which that is presented to. So if it's like a more modern, evangelical church, then it gets adapted to that. So the pastor comes in and he fills in the story. They reference other scholars, other commentators, but none of this is official, right? Because the original texts are just the text being offered in the Gospels, that's the original. Everything after that is just commentaries, right? Some which are more plausible than others, right? So in this case, where very little detail is given by the original author, we as human beings come in and we fill in the blanks, and that is a great inspiration for storytelling, right? Or for engaging a story, right? Now compare that to The Lord of the Rings, where it's a lot of detail. I mean, if you want to know about the history of the hobbits, Tolkien provided a background for that. So the question that we ask ourselves is, which stories are more interesting? Ones that have lots of detail, like The Lord of the Rings, or stories that have very little detail, like the stories of the Gospels, but people love, going in and creating or filling in the gaps with what they think is plausible, either by someone who just enjoys the stories or someone who is a trained scholar. So I'm always I like to come in and build a bridge. So I think both stories are appealing to me, right? So, in conclusion, whatever format of story it is that we find most engaging at the time, I think that as long as we feel that we are, our minds, our imagination are being stimulated, but we are also a part of that story, and we are contributing to those stories, as in the case of, either writing articles or essays, or nowadays, publishing YouTube video content, which the Tolkien community, loves doing, is, creating video content, pointing out a particular detail in the Tolkienian fantasy genre, right? We as a general public, or the fan base or the consumer base, we're not just aimless consumers. We love coming in and following these stories, but we also want to be a part of those stories and create our own stories from it, right? We are also a part of the story creation process, right? I think that as long as we stay engaged and it inspires creativity, there's no losing there, right? So whether you like stories that are, very detailed and have encyclopedias, as in the case of Tolkien's, Lord of the Rings and the History of Middle Earth, or stories that have very little to work with, but it gives us just enough for us to, fill in the gaps and create our own stories from it. I think that, there's something for everybody.